I'm James Rosone.
And I'm Miranda Watson. We're the husband and wife writing team that created the military thriller Monroe Doctrine series and the military sci-fi series The Rise of the Republic.
We have some additional content we'd like to share with you guys today, and we hope you'll find it informative and entertaining. We're planning to create more videos similar to this in the future.
As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get started.
Chapter 14, Thunderclouds. October 31st, 2020. Kosovo, Camp Bondsteel. Sefer Kubura had been stripped naked and strapped to a chair in the interrogation room with the sensory deprivation headphones and eye mask on for nearly 4 hours. His body shivered a bit in the cool air, while goosebumps had formed across much of his body. Once he had been captured and brought to Bondsteel, they immediately began the process of disorienting him and getting him primed for his interrogation. His mind and body were being meticulously prepped for what was about to happen to him. Every effort to break him down physically, emotionally, and mentally was being applied. With a terrorist attack supposed to happen today, there was not a lot of time to get the information from him, so they had to skip a lot of steps that normally would have been taken. "Seth," said Brigadier General Lancaster, drawing his comrade out of a deep train of thought. "See if he knows anything about the Election Day attack the Serbian group was going to carry out. I'm not confident we'll find Tahir Shikri in time, now that he knows we're after him." Seth nodded. He agreed that the chances of them finding Shikri in less than 72 hours were slim. They'd need to see if Sefer could fill in any of the same pieces to the puzzle. "I'll do my best, sir," Seth responded. "I know I don't have long, so we're going right to the hard stuff." He held up a small black bag with a zipper on it. Nothing more needed to be said. The general walked back to the interrogation observation room along with the other analysts, who would check and cross-reference any information Sefer provided and feed questions to Seth via his earpiece. Once he walked into the interrogation room, Seth told the two guards to take the headset and eye mask off the prisoner. While they were doing this, Seth placed a bottle of water on the table in front of Sefer. When his disoriented detainee could see again, Seth pointed to the water, and through the use of an interpreter, he told him to drink. Seth wasn't fond of working through an interpreter, but he didn't speak Serbo-Croatian or Albanian. Seth was fluent in Mandarin and had a working understanding of Korean, but virtually no European language skills. Sefer grabbed the bottle of water and drank most of it down. He took a minute to survey his surroundings. Just like Rajepi, he couldn't see a way out. Turning his attention back to the American before him, he asked, "Why have you captured me? I haven't done anything to you." The translator did his best to keep up. Pretending the translator wasn't there, just as he had been trained to do, Seth focused his attention on the prisoner and let the man sitting behind him do his job while he focused on doing his own. "We know about the terrorist attack you're planning to carry out in America," Seth asserted. "I want to know how many people are involved and what your targets are." With a look of indignant arrogance, Sefer just laughed. Feeling his anger rising within him, Seth again asked the same question. This time Sefer just spat at Seth. "You'll never find them. You're too late," he said, letting out a deep, guttural laugh. "We'll see how much you laugh in a few minutes," Seth countered, unzipping the small black bag lying on the table in front of him. Sefer's smile immediately turned serious when he saw Seth pull out a small vial with the yellowish liquid in it. Seth filled the syringe about halfway. For effect, he pushed a little bit of the liquid out, allowing a small amount to spray into the air as it pushed the remaining air out of the syringe. Seth looked at his prisoner. "I'm about to give you a drug, Sefer. This isn't a fun drug that makes you happy. You see, this is a specially designed drug, an experimental drug, if you will. It's been manufactured for one sole purpose: to make every nerve ending in your body feel as if it is on fire. In reality, your body won't be enveloped in flames, but I can promise you, your mind won't be able to distinguish the difference. He paused at this point as he let the translator catch up. I'm going to ask you again. How many people are involved in this attack, and what are their targets? He held up the syringe for effect. If you fail to cooperate, I will inject you with this drug. When the translator finished speaking, Sefer looked at him with pure anger and hatred in his eyes. He then sucked as much snot as he could into the back of his throat and attempted to spit it at Seth. Seth stepped aside just in time when the spittle landed behind him, next to his interpreter, who likewise sidestepped the sputum. Seth nodded to one of the guards, who walked up to Sefer from the side and punched him so hard in the side of the face that he fell out of his chair while still strapped to it. The guard then picked the chair up with him still attached to it and held his arms down. Seth walked up to Sefer, jabbed the needle into his deltoid muscle, and depressed the plunger. Within seconds, Sefer's entire demeanor changed. He began to scream uncontrollably. Sweat collected on his forehead and face. The heart monitor the guards had attached to him showed an immediate spike in his pulse as the drug circulated through his body. For the next several minutes, Sefer just shouted and shrieked in agonizing pain as every nerve in his body sent signals to his brain, telling him he was burning from the inside. He kept looking down at his arms and legs, as if not believing that it was possible he wasn't actually engulfed in fire. When Sefer's heart rate had stabilized a bit, Seth asked, "How many people are part of this attack? What are they going to attack?" Sefer tried his best to look tough. He stuck his chin out. "You can torture me all you want, but I will never talk. Never!" Then he screamed again as another wave of pain washed over him. His body tensed up as he fought against the straps holding him to the chair. Seth picked the vial up again and filled the syringe halfway up with more of the yellowish liquid. He showed the drug to Sefer. "This stuff won't kill you, but you'll wish it would. The pain is only going to get worse. I suggest you start to talk. If you do, I can give you another drug that will turn this off like the flick of a switch." He snapped his fingers for effect. Seething with anger, Sefer just growled at him. Seth nodded to the guards again, who moved forward and held the prisoner's arms still as Seth approached. He swiftly injected the second round of drugs into Sefer's arm. Sefer screamed again and again in pain, howling as the agony washed over every cell of his body. He started shaking, sweat now dripping off his face and the rest of his body. His heart rate was now spiking up to 200 beats a minute. Seth knew he couldn't push him much further, or he'd stroke out. I hope he breaks in a few more minutes, Seth thought. He didn't want to resort to the physical stuff, but he would if he had to. 3 minutes went by with no one saying anything. Seth just watched as Sefer rocked back and forth against the restraints in pain. All I want is a number. How many people are going to carry out the attack? Seth asked, using a more comforting tone. Shaking uncontrollably, Sefer looked up at Seth. "Fine, I'll tell you, just make it stop!" he yelled. "I can't take it anymore!" Nodding but not smiling, Seth replied, "Okay, Sefer, I'll make it stop. Just tell me how many people are involved in the attack." He picked up a different vial with a clear liquid in it. Seth grabbed a clean syringe and filled it up about a quarter of the way. Then he paused as he waited for the answer. With fire in his eyes and hatred Seth had only seen a few times in his life, Sefer cursed at him a few times before he finally said, "6. 6 people are going to carry out the attack today." Nodding, Seth got up and walked over to Sefer. Before placing the syringe into his arm, he asked. How are they going to carry out their attack? Looking up at Seth, Sefer suddenly sported a wicked grin. It doesn't matter. You're too late to stop them, he said. Tilting his head to the side, Seth replied, Then you should have no problem telling me how it's going to happen. I mean, if we're too late, then what difference does it make? He then proceeded to inject Sefer with a concoction that would turn the effects of the nerve pain off. Unbeknownst to his prisoner, Seth had already mixed this drug with his other drug of choice, the happy drug that made people extremely calm, chatty, and completely unable to resist answering his questions. It took only a moment for the new concoction to take effect. In a fraction of a second, Sefer's body language completely changed. Every muscle in his body that had been tense immediately relaxed. Seth watched the telltale expression of exhilaration take hold of his prisoner's face. The hatred and animosity were gone. Sefer laughed at Seth's question. You're right. It doesn't make a difference. You can't stop them. You know why you can't stop them? He asked. Walking back to the chair opposite Sefer, Seth sat back down and looked back at him. No, why don't you enlighten me? He asked. Sefer smiled. Look at me. Look at you. Look at your interpreter. We're all white. You can't stop my bombers because, unlike Arabs, we're all white. We look just like you. You can't stop us because you can't distinguish us from yourselves. Seth nodded at the response. He had to give these guys credit. Whoever had thought up this master plan had done a superb job. They had found a group of Islamic extremists who looked just like the average American or European. Seth moved to praising his prisoner and stroking his ego. Clever. Incredibly clever, Sefer, he said. The prisoner smiled and nodded. Our attack is even more clever, he said, subconsciously repeating Seth's words. Not only are we using white people to carry it out, we're bringing the jihadis directly to your most vulnerable people. Tonight, when your children go out trick-or-treating, our suicide bombers will strike. Seth did his best to conceal his horror and his own anger. My own kids are going to be out tonight, he thought, an undercurrent of panic rising up. Seth took a deep breath and steadied himself. What type of attack are they going to carry out? He asked calmly. Sefer snickered. One you can't stop. Martyr attacks. Shaking his head disapprovingly, Seth exclaimed, Impossible. You can't get the equipment to build a suicide vest in America. Not in 2020. Maybe a decade ago, but not these days. Seth was trying to create doubt in Sefer's mind and get him to tell them more details that might help them track down who the attackers might be. You Americans are so arrogant. You think you know everything. You know nothing. Our vests aren't homemade. These are professionally made using military-grade explosives. When you have friends in high places and you're doing the will of Allah, nothing is impossible. You really think the Chinese are going to help you? Seth retorted. They've probably sold you fake explosives just to make money off you. He was throwing a piece of meat out there just to see what Sefer's response would be. Tilting his head to the side, Sefer gave a wry smile. You know about the Chinese? We know everything, Seth said nonchalantly. Why don't you tell me your version? Sefer smiled and shook his head. Nice trick, but I think I'll let you figure things out on your own. For the next hour, Seth tried multiple different angles and approaches to get Sefer to give up the details of the type of suicide attack his people were going to carry out, and whether he knew anything else about the Election Day attack the Serbian group was planning. Unfortunately, Sefer wouldn't budge, despite the drugs Seth continued to pump into him. Frustrated, Seth turned the interrogation over to one of the DevGru interrogation teams to work on him for a while. He needed to write up what he had. While he didn't have all the details he was after, they now knew that terrorists were going to target trick-or-treaters tonight. It wasn't a lot to go on, but hopefully that bit of information could be pieced together with others and paint enough of a picture for someone to see the whole thing. Fort Meade, Maryland, National Security Agency. National Security Advisor Robert Gray drummed his fingers on the mahogany table as he waited for one of the deputy directors of the NSA to come in and brief him. The president had signed an executive order suspending some privacy laws in the U.S. that barred the NSA from being able to listen on phone calls made by individuals who fit a predetermined profile that had been created by the DOJ, FBI, NSA, and DHS, and the NSA was now quite busy sorting through their mounds of data. Fortunately, intelligence had determined that the attack was going to be carried out by individuals from Bosnia, Serbia, Kosovo, Albania, and Macedonia, so the NSA could focus their efforts on going after individuals and groups that fit that specific demographic. Of course, the EO was only valid for 5 days, but he hoped it would be just long enough for them to identify the terrorists before they could carry out their attacks. God, if word ever got out about what we're doing, this could really go south on us, he thought. He knew the optics of it would be especially bad, since it was right before an election. Suddenly, the door to his office opened. One of the deputy directors of the NSA walked in with a woman he didn't immediately recognize. "Good morning, Mr. Gray," said Deputy Director Tony Wilds. He walked up and extended his hand. Smiling, NSA Gray responded, "It's actually afternoon now." He motioned to the chairs and they took their seats. Tony blushed slightly. "I suppose you're right," he said. "We've been busy trying to track down the information you requested. I must say I'm rather surprised the AG and the FBI went along with this EO. This is an incredibly expansive directive." He opened his briefcase and proceeded to pull out a folder he'd brought with him. "Extraordinary times call for extraordinary steps to be taken to protect our democracy," Gray said flatly. "Yes, of course," said Tony, shifting a bit in his seat. "Okay, per the parameters given to us, we've run some searches, and I think we've come up with some possible names and individuals who fit the bill." NSA Gray lifted his left eyebrow suspiciously. He hadn't expected a result so quickly. The woman who'd taken a seat next to Tony explained, "You've taken the leash off. We're responding." Gray smiled at the response. "I'm sorry, what's your name and what do you do here?" he asked. "I'm Leah Riesling. I'm one of the department heads in the counterintelligence department. I run the European desk," she replied. Robert nodded. "Good to know," he replied. Then he wrote her name and job title down on his pad of paper. When he had finished, he said, "Great job finding something so quick. So what have you got for me?" "We have a few names for you," said Leah, pointing to a list on the first page of the report Tony had produced. "These 6 individuals flew into the U.S. on German passports 5 days ago. 3 men and 3 women. Nothing was flagged when they entered the country, but we've since learned that the biometrics they provided matched German nationals who are still presently located in Germany." NSA Gray held up a hand. "Whoa! How is that possible? Wouldn't this have been caught when they entered?" "The passports were spoofed, sir. They took a legitimate passport, forged the image with their intended operator, and then hacked the electronics to associate someone else's fingerprints. When we did our check at customs, everything would have seemed correct." "Okay. So how did you guys figure that out then?" asked Gray. "Under normal circumstances, we'd honestly have no idea that someone had managed to successfully spoof a passport. However, with the EO you guys provided us, we broke into the German biometric database. After running recent entry data against their system, we found that these fingerprints matched other German nationals, not the ones listed on their passports." "How?" Gray asked, mouth agape. The best we can come up with is that these men and women were provided with fake fingerprints to place over their own, ones that were electronically paired to their passports. Leah reached into her pocket and pulled out a small case. These, she said, holding up what looked like a small piece of tape, are fake fingerprints. We use them on some of our own agents when they're entering a country that uses biometrics at their entry control points, and we need to slip past them. Prior to approaching the customs agent, you pull this side of the adhesive off and then place it over your own fingerprints. You then pull the other end of the tape off, and for the next hour or so, you have a different person's fingerprints. It's pretty high-tech stuff. Shaking his head in disbelief, NSA Gray asked, "Who could provide this kind of stuff? I mean, is this readily available or easy to fabricate? I didn't even know they really made crap like this. I thought that was just James Bond movie material." Leah snickered. "It's spycraft, Mr. Gray. Believe me, there's a lot more where that stuff came from. But as to how these particular individuals got this, well, they could have bought it on the black market. It's not cheap, but it can be acquired. However, the fact that the real biometrics of these passports and these fingerprints match actual German citizens, particularly those of people in the German criminal system, the individuals were sitting in jail, not able to travel, and therefore cause questions. It's highly likely they were provided by the BND. German intelligence? To what end? Why would the BND have ties to these individuals? Gray asked. Tony chimed in. We don't have definite proof the BND is involved just yet. We'll know more in another day or so, once we've had time to crunch through their secure communications, text messages, and other electronic communications. Wow. Okay. So what else have you found on these individuals? Do we have a way of tracking them or know where they are? We took the images that were captured by customs and ran them against the facial recognition databases from the CIA, the DoD, and the NSA. We were then able to ascertain their real names. Taking that data, plus all known aliases for these individuals and the names that were used on the passports, we combed through any mention of these names on social media, email, chat boards, or phone calls. As of 30 minutes ago, we managed to locate all 6 of them, Tony explained. He puffed his chest out a bit, clearly proud of his people's effort. Robert was visibly excited. You found them? Where are they? Do we know anything else about them or what they're doing? He asked rapidly. Tony held up his hand. Hold up, Mr. Gray. Yes, we believe we've managed to find them, but we still haven't fully determined if they are in fact the terrorists we're looking for. All we know right now is that they entered the U.S. using spoofed passports. They could legitimately be German BND agents, infiltrating the U.S. under non-official cover. We do that to Germany and many other nations all the time. It doesn't mean either side is about to commit a terrorist act. Until we can get physical eyes on them, I'm hesitant to say that these are the men and women we're looking for. Do they all have a nexus to the Balkans? Asked Gray. They do. We verified the facial images against multiple different law enforcement and passport control interactions in Europe. Okay. Why don't you walk me through a few of the contacts, and let's try to see if we can make the connection then, said Gray. Also, I want you to forward the information you have onto the FBI immediately, so they can work to get eyes on them for you. This is way too hot to sit on right now. Tony looked uncomfortable with the request, but nodded toward Leah. He then picked up a secured phone on the table and placed a quick call to someone. Yeah, this is Tony, Gray overheard. I need you to send that data we talked about over to the FBI liaison rep for them to action. There was a brief pause as the person on the other end acknowledged the orders, and then Tony hung up the phone. Leah then picked up the conversation. She pointed to a picture of one of the women from the group. Okay, this picture was taken at the customs station in Newark 5 days ago, she began. Here's another picture of her passing through customs in Ankara, Turkey, 3 years ago. This is her at customs in Geneva, Switzerland, and again in Frankfurt, Germany. Our facial recognition software matched the image taken in Newark to all of these images. However, the passport said she was this person, Leah explained, pointing to the image of a similar-looking woman. This woman, however, is serving a 3-year prison sentence in Leipzig for bank fraud. The three of them talked for another 20 minutes as Leah pointed out the other biometric matches to other passport control pictures taken from a few different countries. While they couldn't find any definitive links that tied the 6 individuals directly to ISIS or any other Islamic extremist organization, they were able to determine that they had all traveled to Turkey during the height of ISIS power and appeared to have stayed in the region for more than a year. I'm not sure we'll find a direct connection to ISIS, but once we are able to obtain their true biometrics, we may get lucky and find something in the DoD's biometric database, Leah explained. Right now, all we have is facial images. What we need is fingerprints or DNA. We might get lucky and find a match to one of their fingerprints on some captured enemy material, weapons, or remnants of an IED. Nodding, Gray said, I'll see if the FBI can surreptitiously collect their prints. But then again, if these attacks are supposed to happen this evening, we may not have time to do that. NSA Gray did some calculations in his head. All right. While the FBI is running these 6 individuals down, I want you guys to keep looking for anyone else that might fit this profile. Maybe we'll get lucky and find another needle in the haystack that fits our profile. We still need to find the Election Day attackers. We know that groups involved in that attack are supposedly tied to the Islamic State in Serbia. I'm going to make an educated guess that those attackers, like the Bosnian and Kosovar group, are probably from Serbia. So let's see if we can get a bead on them. We have 3 days until that attack is scheduled. Even if the election does get postponed, we have no guarantee the attacks won't happen. Agreed. We'll start working on that immediately, said Tony as he stood up, apparently realizing the meeting was coming to a close. Leah followed his lead. Hey, on a side note, he said, as if suddenly remembering something, what the heck happened on that raid in Serbia? I heard we lost 7 operators from SEAL Team 6 on that botched raid, along with 2 helicopters. Gray sighed and shook his head. We're still trying to piece that together. The agency believes someone in the MUP, the Serbian Ministry of Internal Affairs, tipped them off on the raid. I'm actually more concerned with finding out who provided the man-pad to them that brought down our gunship. God help us if they have access to more of them, or manage to smuggle them into the U.S. They talked for a few minutes as NSA Gray walked with Tony and Leah down to the helipad. The helicopter from Andrews Air Force Base had flown in to pick Gray up and ferry him back to the White House. Time was too short on this critical day for him to be jammed up in traffic. He needed to get back to the White House Situation Room so he could better coordinate the government's response. Jacksonville, North Carolina. Special Agents Scott Spellman and Amelia Riley had just pulled up to the parking lot in front of the mall entrance near Sears. Looking down the row of parked cars, they spotted the blue Toyota Corolla they had been following for the last hour. What had started as a weekend on edge had turned into something far worse. They knew there was an elevated alert about a possible terrorist attack leading up to the election, but they'd had no idea when they'd been called into work that morning that their city was one of the chosen targets. When they'd received a flash warning from headquarters and the NSA about a possible suicide bomber in Jacksonville, they'd thought it was a mistake. However, when the NSA began to provide them real-time GPS data of where the person was, they knew it wasn't a blunder. At 3 p.m., they received their first tracking data, and they'd hopped in their car to head toward the coordinates they'd been given. They'd quickly realized that their suspected attacker was on the move, so they had made best speed to find the car and get eyes on their suspect. What they'd found was a nondescript blue Toyota Corolla, driving casually down the streets of downtown Jacksonville like any other person. After 10 minutes, the car had parked near a local mosque. Agents Spellman and Riley watched their mark go inside. He stayed there for roughly an hour before returning to his vehicle. When he eventually walked out, they used the telescopic lens on their camera to grab several pictures of the man before he entered his car, and quickly sent the images back to their office. The potential bomber appeared to be a male of European descent, late 20s to early 30s. They continued to follow the driver, who appeared to be heading toward the mall. Then they received a message from the office on the radio. "An HRT team is en route to intercept the driver," their supervisor told them. "Keep an eye on him until they arrive and continue to relay his movements. Local law enforcement is also being alerted and will be sending help to you." When the transmission had ended, Agent Riley remarked, "Geez, this is the real deal if the hostage rescue team is getting involved." When the Corolla pulled into the mall, Agent Spellman nervously tapped on the steering wheel. "Riley, I'd rather not deal with a presumed terrorist on our own, but if this is going down now, we have to do something," he said. As they got out of the car, Agent Riley called their office to let them know what was going on, and they walked quickly to intercept the man. In the distance, they could hear the police sirens getting closer. As the man got closer to the entrance of Sears, Agent Spellman took off running, and Agent Riley moved swiftly to catch up. The suspect reached for the door. "Excuse me, sir," Spellman shouted. "Do you have the time?" The man turned around just in time to see two people running towards him, guns drawn, and the lights of several police cars flashing nearby. His eyes grew wide. The suspect reached for a device that had been dangling from the inside of the right sleeve of his coat, but Spellman and Riley immediately fired their sidearms, hitting the suspect multiple times in the chest. His body slumped against the entrance and slid down, lifeless. Rushing toward him, Scott shouted, "Run inside and tell everyone to get away from the entrance." He then moved toward the man lying on the ground, with a growing puddle of blood expanding around him. Reaching down to check the man's pulse, Scott confirmed he was dead. Just then, several police officers ran up as well. "Stand back," he ordered. "I need to check his jacket." The officers all looked at each other with concern and fear, then gradually retreated a few dozen feet. Scott took a moment, gently unzipping the man's jacket. As he did, his eyes grew wide as saucers as he saw what he had feared most, a suicide vest. How in the hell did we not set this thing off when we shot him? He wondered, a huge lump forming in his throat as he thought about how close to death he'd just been. Scott backed away from the man's body. "You need to move further back," he shouted to the police. "We need to set up a cordon several hundred feet around the body, just in case they have a way to set off the vest by remote control." He then quickly fumbled with his smartphone, adrenaline coursing through his body at the near-death experience, causing his hands to shake a bit. He called in what had happened and requested a bomb squad to deal with the suicide vest. With confirmation that this man was in fact one of the terrorist bombers, the FBI ordered the remaining 5 individuals to be quickly apprehended before they could carry out their own attacks. In 4 other states, FBI agents moved in to intercept the terrorists before they could detonate their suicide vests. Sadly, 3 FBI agents and several local law enforcement officers were killed when one of the bombers was able to trigger his vest before being killed in a shootout. However, aside from the 3 agents and a handful of police officers who died that day, there were no other casualties. What could have turned into a horrific massacre was prevented. Vinton, Louisiana, Interstate 10. Dusty Hampton had just completed a 10-hour drive across most of Texas in his 18-wheeler on his way to Tallahassee, Florida, when he decided it was time to call it quits for the day and grab himself some dinner and a beer. Spotting the perfect little watering hole, he pulled into the truck lot at the Longhorn Truck and Car Plaza and found a spot next to a couple of other big rigs. Dusty pulled the yellow button to engage the parking brake, locked the door, and then made his way into the diner to grab some food and a cold one before he turned in for the night. He found a table with a seat facing one of the several TVs mounted on the walls and plopped himself down. A waitress came by and brought him a glass of water and a menu. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. "Do you have Miller Lite on tap?" "Yep, sure do," she replied. "Perfect. I'll take one of those while I figure out what I want to eat," Dusty said. "Sounds good," she said, rushing off to grab his beer. About the time the waitress came back, he'd figured out what he wanted to eat. "So, what can I get for you, darling?" the waitress asked with a wink as she slid the Miller Lite over to him. He smiled at the woman, reading her name tag for the first time. Sarah Jo, he thought. A charming southern name if I've ever seen one. "I'd like the Billy's Longhorn ribeye with a baked potato and the seasoned rice," he responded. "How'd you like your steak cooked? Medium rare, please?" She scribbled down his request. "Sure thing, honey. Give me 20 minutes or so and it'll be up." Then she walked off, leaving Dusty to start polishing off his first beer while he watched a rerun of Duck Dynasty. When he'd finished his drink, he flagged Sarah Jo down and asked for another. Just as his second beer arrived, a newscaster came on, interrupting the show. One of the old-timers, who looked to be a regular, flagged one of the waitresses down to ask her to turn the TV up. "The White House has asked for all the networks to broadcast a special message from the president. We're standing by for just a moment as we wait for the president to come on. Oh, as we speak, it looks like he's just about to start." The camera moved from the broadcaster to an image of the president, resolutely sitting behind the desk in the Oval Office. Dusty immediately noticed that Sachs looked exhausted. His eyes had noticeable bags underneath them. "My fellow Americans," the president began, "I come to you tonight with grave news that I feel you, the American people, need to know. As most of you are starting to find out, today the brave men and women of the FBI and Homeland Security intercepted 6 individuals wearing suicide vests just prior to them carrying out their dastardly attacks against our nation. Unfortunately, 3 FBI agents and 5 local police officers were killed when one of the would-be terrorists detonated his suicide vest during a shootout with police at a mall in Manchester, New Hampshire. The other 5 suicide bombers were either killed or apprehended without further loss of life. These terrorists were attempting to carry out a coordinated attack specifically targeted at our children." The president looked visibly shaken as he explained the threat. These 6 suicide bombers were also tied to the terrorist group Islamic State in Kosovo that carried out the October 24th attack against 4 early voting centers. Even now, our braved armed forces are attacking these terrorist safe havens across Kosovo in coordination with our Kosovar partners. I am proud to report that our military has successfully captured the leader of this organization, Luan Rajepi, who will be held accountable for his crimes in a court of law. The president paused for a moment. The 6 suicide bombers that were going to carry out their attack today were part of the Islamic State in Bosnia, a partner of the Kosovo group. Unfortunately, we have credible intelligence that says a third group, the Islamic State in Serbia, is planning to carry out a similar type of terrorist attack against our country this Tuesday on Election Day. We are not sure when these attacks are planned or what specific locations have been targeted. What we do know is that the terrorists plan to carry out attacks in Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Texas. I assure you that our intelligence agencies and law enforcement are working diligently to track these individuals down and stop them. Lifting his chin up, the president leaned forward, looking directly into the camera with renewed energy in his eyes. In the last 3 weeks, the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security have not only uncovered these terrorist plans to attack our nation, they have also discovered a much grander plot to interfere with our election. The Treasury Department, along with our intelligence agencies, has identified several banks in Europe as the financial institutions that funded and supported not only these dastardly terrorist attacks against our country, but a wider, grander scheme to steal our election. Yesterday, the FBI arrested 36 U.S. postal workers who were caught stealing and then selling absentee and mail-in ballots to a third party. Through the collective work of our intelligence agencies, that third party has been identified as being a member of the Chinese Ministry of State Security. The FBI has uncovered evidence that the Chinese Ministry of State Security was involved in and responsible for the theft of these ballots in a brazen attempt to interfere in our presidential election. The stealing of these ballots incidentally took place in the same states these terrorist attacks were planned to take place in. All of this was orchestrated in an attempt to suppress voter turnout in key districts, to sway the election in these states, and thus manipulate the Electoral College. To date, the FBI, working with local election officials, have determined that more than 300,000 votes in 5 states were intercepted and destroyed before they could be counted. Because we have no way of knowing which individuals' ballots were stolen, I have consulted with the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security, and we are going to void all absentee and mail-in ballots collected in these states so far. We will require people to either vote using the iVote app, vote in person, or request a polling worker to visit their residence and assist them in using the iVote app. Because this will all take time to implement, and because the election is only 4 days away, we must postpone the election from November 3rd until Monday, January 4th, 2021. I am also declaring January 4th a one-time only national holiday to allow people the day off to go vote. The integrity of our election is absolutely paramount to ensuring trust in the federal government and our elected officials. When the FBI discovered proof that a foreign power had interfered with our election, I felt it the responsible thing, the right thing, to bring this situation to you, to make sure you, the American people, know that your government is doing everything in its power to ensure the integrity of our elections. We will not tolerate a foreign power interfering in our election in an attempt to affect policies to their benefit. With factual evidence of what has transpired, I have directed the Treasury Department to sanction the financial institutions in Europe and Asia that were involved in this conspiracy. They will be cut off from any financial dealings with the United States. I have also directed the Department of Justice to pursue all available criminal charges against the individuals involved. I am confident that win or lose this election, history will look back on our decision to bring this to you, the American people, as the right decision. If I lose the election on January 4th, I will have lost fair and square, and not because of foreign interference. It is imperative that people are able to trust the results of the election and not have the stain of foreign interference on whoever wins. I want to say a special thanks to the men and women of the FBI, Homeland Security, and Department of Defense, and our intelligence agencies for their hard work in both uncovering this conspiracy before it was too late and from stopping these terrorists from carrying out another dastardly attack on our great nation. May God bless you all and keep you safe in these troubling times. As Duck Dynasty came back on, Dusty shook his head in horror. Holy cow, I need to drop this load and get out of Florida ASAP, he thought. He couldn't help but think that he might have gotten caught up in one of the attacks. He stared at the food on his plate. Suddenly, he wasn't very hungry anymore. Cleveland, Ohio, Senator Tate's election headquarters. "What the hell are we supposed to do now?" yelled Lewis Carter, Senator Tate's campaign manager. "He postponed the election?" His face was red with anger. The polls had been showing them inching ahead in several swing states just prior to the announcement. "Damn him!" shouted Senator Marshall Tate. He stood up and let loose a string of obscenities at the now muted TV and the political pundits who were analyzing the president's address. When Tate stopped swearing, Jerome Powell, his longtime chief of staff, offered, "We can file an emergency injunction and force the election to be held on Tuesday. If we can get the court to block the delay and the voiding of the absentee and mail-in ballots, we can still move forward with the original election date." Senator Tate grumbled, then ordered, "Do it." Jerome grabbed for his smartphone and dialed the number for their chief counsel. While he spent the next few moments on the phone with their lawyer, Lewis picked up his own cell phone and called the Democratic National Committee chairman to get the ball rolling on his end. They'd need to move quickly in order to stop the president's executive order from being implemented before it was too late. With Jerome and Lewis in motion, Marshall turned to one of his senior aides. "Janie, call our friend over at DHS and find out what the hell is going on. Tell him we need his help to slow this down, or to do what he can to make sure the election still happens on Tuesday." She nodded and immediately got up to walk into the other room to place the call. Marshall Tate looked at the TV in shock and anger. He was less than 4 days away from being elected the next president of the United States, and now it all seemed in limbo. The talking heads were droning on about how big a bullet the country had just dodged with the apprehension of these 6 suicide bombers. Another group began blathering about whether or not the president had the authority to postpone the election. Suddenly, Marshall's phone buzzed on the table next to him. Looking at the caller ID, he saw that it was a New York number. He grabbed the phone. "This is Marshall." He sat and listened for a moment as the caller began to feed him information. A smile crept across his face. "This is excellent news," he said. "Are you sure this won't get challenged in court?" Another 30 seconds passed as the caller explained the situation further. Marshall nodded a couple of times. "Is there a time for the Supreme Court to hear the case before Tuesday?" As he heard the answer, Marshall's smile grew and his spirits rose. "I still may win this thing," he thought. Pulling the smartphone away from his face, Marshall ended the call feeling much better than he had just 5 minutes ago. His crack legal team was on it. Less than 4 hours after the president's proclamation, they had managed to get a judge from the 6th Circuit to issue an injunction against the postponing of the election, labeling it unconstitutional and outside the president's statutory authority. According to the legal experts, only Congress had the authority to change the date of the election, and his party was firmly in control of the House of Representatives. Marshall took a deep breath, let it out, and allowed himself to drift to sleep in his chair while his team continued their work. Chapter 15. Supreme Court. November 1st, 2020. Washington, D.C. Chief Justice Mark Lighthouse couldn't believe what he read in the New York Times as he sat at his kitchen table. It was Saturday morning, and normally he'd enjoy the crossword section of the paper, but not with the headlines he saw splashed across the front page. Terrorists had nearly carried out 6 attacks against locations where children were trick-or-treating the night before. Then the president made his bombshell announcement about Chinese interference in the election. When he read about Sachs postponing the election for 60 days, he immediately knew the Department of Justice and the president would get sued, and the proclamation would be put on hold. He shook his head. Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution clearly stated that Congress had the authority to determine when and how frequently a presidential election was held. The Attorney General should have advised him better on that proclamation, he thought. Justice Lighthouse had been feeling nauseous and a bit under the weather for the last 24 hours. He was hoping he'd feel better by Monday, because he knew all too well the Attorney General would demand they hear the merits of the case either tomorrow or Monday at the latest, so they could rule on the constitutionality of the President's decree. There was certainly a case to be made with regard to public safety, but unless the Speaker of the House came out in support of the executive order, Lighthouse didn't think an effective argument could be made for the legality of the election being postponed this way. Just as he was about to pick up his smartphone to call one of the other justices to see if they should hear the case on Sunday or wait until Monday, he suddenly felt the overwhelming need to vomit. After retching his guts out for a few minutes in the bathroom, Justice Lighthouse leaned over the sink and splashed some water on his face. He briefly looked at himself in the mirror and was startled by how bad he looked. His skin had several dark marks on it he'd never noticed before. Even his hair looked odd. He ran his hand along his hairline. When he looked down at his hand, there was a small patch of hair in it. He suddenly felt panicked. Something's not right, he realized. Justice Lighthouse walked over to the living room and found his wife.
"Honey, I need you to drive me to the hospital," he said.
"My gosh, what's wrong, Mark?" she asked.
"I don't know, but I just threw up and my hair is falling out."
She immediately grabbed her purse and took him to the ER at Walter Reed Hospital. When the triage nurse saw his condition, he was rushed to the back, and a doctor saw him almost immediately. 4 hours and a few blood tests later, several doctors talking in the hall seemed stumped by his symptoms. What was clear, though, was that his condition was worsening. When the other Supreme Court justices started to arrive at Walter Reed with similar symptoms, it became clear they had all been infected with something, but they were in a race against time to figure out what it was and how to treat it. Washington, D.C., Robert F. Kennedy Building, Department of Justice. "What do you mean the justices are all sick? Did they all come down with the flu at the same time?" shouted Malcolm Wright angrily into the receiver of the phone he was white-knuckling. "This is what happens when you have a geriatric ward for a Supreme Court," he thought. "It's not a cold or a virus, Malcolm," retorted Carl Iverson, the Solicitor General. The AG hated dealing with this poor excuse of a man. He was an arrogant, overly confident jerk who'd lost a couple of high-profile cases before the Supreme Court. Consequently, Carl had fallen out of favor both with the president and with Malcolm. "If they aren't sick with the flu, then what the hell is it?" Malcolm demanded. "They don't know yet, but it's serious. They're showing signs of organ failure." "Are they all sick?" the AG asked, now a bit of concern in his voice. Sure, 1 or 2 of them could have come down with the flu or some other ailment, but all of them at once? No, that wasn't a coincidence. "Yes, all 9 justices have been hospitalized at Walter Reed," replied Carl. "Well, let me know as soon as you find out what's wrong with them. We need to get this case settled ASAP, Carl. We can't sit around and wait for this to make its way through the normal channels," Malcolm finished, and then he hung up the phone. Malcolm looked around on his desk for his direct number to the FBI director. He didn't find the number he was looking for right away, but he did uncover the business card to his deputy. He quickly dialed the man's cell number. It rang a couple of times before he answered.
"This is Deputy Director Joseph Luttrell speaking."
"Joe, this is Malcolm over at DOJ. I just got a very disturbing call from the Solicitor General. He's trying to get the case on this presidential executive order heard by the Supreme Court justices, but he just told me they all suddenly showed up sick at Walter Reed a few hours ago."
"Wait, just 1 or 2 of them? Or did you say all of them?"
asked Joe. "You heard right the first time," Malcolm said. "All of them. Something doesn't feel right about this. I need you to get a couple of your best agents over to Walter Reed ASAP and find out what the hell is going on. As soon as you know something, get back to me. Then he hung up the phone. If the Supreme Court justices were all sick, he needed to figure out what their next steps were in getting this EO reinstated. They only had 3 days left before the election. Deputy Director Joe Luttrell pulled up to the emergency entrance of the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center exactly 20 minutes after the AG had told him about the Supreme Court justices. He had phoned ahead to his headquarters office, telling them he wanted a couple of agents sent over to Walter Reed to meet him there. His next call had been to his boss, the director, to make sure he was kept in the loop. His boss had told him to find out what was going on, and if it appeared that any foul play was happening, to call him before he called the AG or anyone else. Joe swerved his government-issued vehicle into one of the empty parking spots reserved for law enforcement, quickly locked the door, and made his way into the emergency room. As soon as he reached the receptionist, he flashed his FBI credentials. "I need to speak with the managing doctor on duty, now," he said in a tone that meant business. The receptionist nodded. She picked up a phone and paged the head doctor over the PA. A couple of minutes later, 3 more FBI agents walked in and quickly headed toward him. Together, they waited for the doctor to arrive. A man in teal surgical scrubs approached. When he got within a couple of feet, he waved for them to follow him over to an empty office to talk. The 5 of them filed into the room and then waited as the doctor closed the door. Turning to face the G-men, he said, "I'm Dr. Patrick Morris. I'm the head doctor on duty for the weekend. I assume you are all here to discuss the Supreme Court justices?" The agents all nodded. Nodding, Dr. Morris said, "Chief Justice Mark Lighthouse arrived about 5 hours ago, complaining of vomiting, nausea, and diarrhea. While he said he'd been feeling under the weather for about 2 days, he felt something really bad must be going on when clumps of his hair began to fall out, so he had his wife drive him here." He held up a hand to forestall the barrage of questions he knew he was about to get slammed with. "We've been running tests to find out what could be wrong with them. Up to this point, all our tests have come back normal. He's not sick with the flu, pneumonia, or any sort of exotic illness. If I didn't know any better, I'd say his symptoms would appear to be radiation sickness, but I don't see how he could have been exposed to any sort of radiation that could cause these types of symptoms." Joe thought about that for a moment before asking, "What about the other justices? Do they appear to have the same symptoms?" Dr. Morris nodded. "Unfortunately, they do." One of the agents asked, "Is it possible the justices were poisoned?" Another agent retorted, "Why would the justices be poisoned? Who would stand to gain from that?" The doctor then looked at them like an idea had just struck him. "If you'll excuse me, there's one other test we haven't run that might tell us what's going on." With that, the doctor left the room and jogged back down the hallway he had come from, leaving the FBI agents unsure of what to say or do next. After a few awkward moments of silence, Joe motioned for the other agents to follow him over to a nearby vending machine. "Since it looks like we might be here for a little bit, let me at least buy you guys some coffee," he offered. One of the agents held up a hand. "No offense, sir, but you're not buying us vending machine coffee when there's a Starbucks right over there," he said. 2 of the other agents snickered. Joe laughed, nodded, and then the 4 of them walked over to Starbucks to get a drink while they waited for the doctor to come back and tell them what the heck was going on. 32 minutes later, Dr. Morris walked back over to them with a grim look on his face. "I take it you found something with this newest test?" inquired Joe as the others looked on. Nodding, the doctor plopped down in the chair next to them as he ran his right hand through his graying hair. "When you guys mentioned poisoning, it got me thinking about the 2018 poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal in the UK. They, of course, were poisoned with the Novichok nerve agent. None of the justices appear to have any of those symptoms." The FBI agents let out a collective sigh of relief at that proclamation. Dr. Morris went on to add, "However, in 2006, The Russians poisoned a former spy by the name of Alexander Litvinenko in London. Mr. Litvinenko exhibited symptoms of radiation poisoning, which was later discovered to be induced acute radiation syndrome related to polonium-210 poisoning. It was the first known case of someone being killed through polonium poisoning. Joe Luttrell stood up at this point, looking down at the doctor. Are you saying the judges? Are you saying all the Supreme Court justices have been poisoned with polonium? The other agents looked at Joe and then the doctor in a state of shock and disbelief. I'm afraid that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm not sure how it happened, or even when it happened, but it appears all of them have been given enough polonium to be lethal. Joe reached out for the edge of the chair, suddenly feeling a little lightheaded. He sat back down before looking at the doctor. Is there anything that can be done for them? He asked, barely managing to get the words out. Dr. Morris shook his head. I'm afraid not. We might have been able to do something for them the day they were initially poisoned, but it's far too late for that now. If I had to estimate, I'd say they were probably given the polonium 4, maybe 5 days ago, just based on when the justices said they began to have some symptoms. With all the color completely drained from his face, Joe asked, How long do they have? Grimacing, Dr. Morris replied, 48 to 72 hours at best. But frankly, the next couple of days are going to be rough. Their internal organs are going to start failing really soon. There's going to be a rapid decline once that starts to take place. Joe ran his fingers nervously through his hair. Dr. Morris, I don't have to tell you how important this announcement is going to be, or how this is going to impact the country. What I need you to do right now is work with my agents here to make sure this information stays contained, at least for the rest of the day. I need to brief the director, and obviously the AG is going to want to say something, and possibly the president. Can you help me keep this under wraps long enough to allow the leaders of our country to respond? For all we know, other members of the government could have been targeted by this attack. Dr. Morris suddenly looked very concerned at that prospect. He nodded solemnly, and then led the other agents back to the wing of the hospital where they had the justices sequestered. The agents then spoke with the medical staff to make sure they all knew the urgency of keeping the situation quiet for the time being. Attorney General Malcolm Wright thought he was going to be sick when FBI Deputy Director Joe Luttrell finished briefing him and FBI Director Nolan Polanski. The Solicitor General asked the obvious question. If the justices are sick, no, let me rephrase that. If all of the Supreme Court justices are dying and thus unable to hear this case, how are we going to get this resolved before the election? We only have 2 days to get this sorted out before Tuesday. Director Polanski shot him a dirty look. You have to be kidding me, he retorted. You're worried about them ruling on your EO case? This could be the first stage of a major attack against our government. The Solicitor General snapped. Protecting the country and finding out who did this attack is your lane. I'm trying to make sure a fraudulent election isn't held on Tuesday, creating a constitutional crisis. Joe held his hand up. Please, gentlemen, none of us are the enemy. Clearly, someone thought this entire thing out. Someone or some group knew that if we found out about this conspiracy to steal the election, the president would issue some sort of executive order, and that EO would be challenged in court, resulting in us having to take it to the Supreme Court. Whoever is behind this conspiracy anticipated our moves and preempted us by poisoning the justices before they could issue a ruling. Malcolm sighed. This clearly falls in your lane, he said, motioning to Joe and Director Polanski. Who could have carried out this kind of attack? Who has that kind of capability? And are we in danger ourselves? What about the president or the members of Congress? The two FBI men looked at each other before returning the AG's eye contact. I can't say for certain that no one else in the government is in immediate danger, Director Polanski admitted. My advice is that we alert the Capitol Police and the Secret Service of the possibility of polonium poisoning. As to who could carry out this type of attack, well, there are only a couple of nations who have this kind of capability. The prime suspects, however, would have to be Russia and China. In the case of Russia, we know they've carried out this exact type of attack before. They've also carried out assassinations of dissidents in the UK. The Chinese are also capable of carrying out this kind of attack. That said, they have no history of targeted assassinations abroad. However, they certainly do have an axe to grind against President Sachs. He's caused them immense economic harm with the trade tariffs, so I wouldn't want to totally rule the Chinese out. Malcolm sighed. Okay, Nolan, here's what I want you to do. Collect as much evidence as you can about this attack. Put together as much information as you can about who could have carried out this attack and how. I also need you to finish the evidentiary case against Mr. Wang and the Ministry of State Security now. I'm going to recommend the President call an emergency meeting with the leaders of the House and Senate to present this information to them. It's obvious we're not going to be able to rely on the Supreme Court to decide on the constitutionality of the EO. The only other course of action is for us to lay out the case to the Speaker of the House and convince her to agree to postpone the election until January 4th. I also need you to compile whatever you guys have on the election day terrorist attacks. If we still don't have any leads, you guys need to let them know. They need to make a decision about what they're going to do, and soon. The country is headed to a constitutional crisis if we don't get this situation solved.
Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss another video.
In the meantime, we have plenty of reading material to keep you busy. You can find it all on our website, frontlinepublishinginc.com.